Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and welcome to part 3 of the Build a Shopify app series, where we are building a small product updater app together. In the last few videos, we got our project created, went through the app structure, and modified the API routes to start getting some data to the front end. In this video, we're going to start building out the front end using Shopify Polaris, which is the design and component system for Shopify's UI. If you want to follow along in the code with me, then you can fork my repo on GitHub, where you'll find the code for each of these videos. And we'll be starting out on the branch part 2 admin and making changes as we go on from here. And then I'll push the finished code from today into a new branch for this portion of part 3. Since going over the entire front end and Polaris library here would end up being a really long video, I'll be splitting up this Polaris section into most likely 2 videos. And then we'll move on to hooking up the front end and the back end and finishing up our app. You'll see the Polaris system being used everywhere in Shopify, since it's basically a set of guidelines and styling rules that make sure there's a seamless flow between all pages and views of any part of Shopify. They also provide a React component library with these pre-built components that adhere to the style guide and make it extremely easy to build a great looking UI for our app. And it'll mesh perfectly with the look of the Shopify admin since it's all built with these same styling rules. So let's go ahead and jump into our code editor and we'll get started. The first thing we'll do to get started learning Polaris is head over to their docs, which you can find in a link in the description, or you can just search Shopify Polaris on Google. And then we'll want to come to this components page and we'll take a look at some common ones and see how to use them in our app. First, we're going to scroll down and take a look at the page component, which is right here. And this will be the first component used in any new page you build because it's a wrapper that allows you to add things like a page title and primary and secondary actions to the top of the header here. If you click on the example called with destructive secondary action, you can see a simpler example of what the page component does. If you scroll down to the actual code of it, this one just has a title and a secondary action here, which shows up on the right hand side of the page header. So this one is that delete button. You can click through the other examples to see how you can configure the page based on the different props, and all of the components here will have different configuration examples, so you can reference those. Most of these components are very straightforward to use. You can just import them from the Shopify Polaris library and then make sure to add the required props, which you can find in the documentation here. The next component we'll go through, which is also important and will be used pretty much everywhere in your app, is the layout component. This component is used to create the main layout on a page, and you can configure it a few different ways. You can do something like a single column like you see here, 2 column, 3 column, and then there are options to use multiple different columns with different widths like this, where one takes up the equivalent of 2/3 and then a single sidebar type column over here. So let's click back to the 1 column example and take a look at the code reference below. You can see the page component that we just looked at, which wraps around the code for this entire page. And then we have our layout component, and that underneath that it has a child component which uses this dot notation that we see here. A lot of other Polaris components also use this. You'll see something like you see here with a layout, and then a child's called layout.section. If you click through the examples, you can typically see all the props that are available here. I haven't found anywhere in the docs where these child components are really detailed and where it explains how to actually use them. So it's best to just get familiar with the components you want to use and look through all of the examples to understand how to best use them. So now if you click on the 2 columns with equal width example, you can see that they use one layout.section here and another one down here, so 2 of them. And they both have this prop called 1/2, and that's basically how you can get this equal width 2 column layout, is by specifying that each layout.section should be 1/2 of the page width. Very similar for the 3 columns with equal width, where there's just going to be 3 layout.section child components, and each of them will have a 1/3 prop. So that's pretty straightforward how that works and how you can achieve different layouts here. So now that we have a very rough idea of how to navigate this documentation and what to look for in these component examples, let's go ahead and dive in and start building the UI for our app. We'll start by checking out the existing code so we can see more examples of Polaris components working together. So we'll go over to our code editor, and I'm on the part 2 admin API branch, which was from the previous video. So we'll just be continuing on from that code. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you haven't been following along with the code that I've been writing, you can fork my GitHub repo and it'll be the exact template. It won't be the latest up-to-date version of Shopify API or their latest template, but you'll still be able to get all of the main concepts down and be able to transition to that one later. So if you want to follow along exactly with what I'm doing, go fork my repo. You'll want to come to the part 2 admin API branch, and then we'll be able to go from there. So we'll start out in the index.jsx file, which is under the web, front end, and then the pages directory. So index.jsx. And pretty straightforward, but all of the front end code is housed under this front end folder. Again, this will be exactly like this if you're using my repo. The template you're using may be different though, so you'll just have to kind of find the main page for whatever template you're using. So here in this index.jsx file, you can see they start out with the page component, and then we see the layout component here, which we did take a look at in the documentation. And in this case, they're using a single layout with 2 layout.sections within it. There's no props on these sections specifying the width, like the 1/2 or 1/3 props that we saw in the examples. So in this case, it just automatically spaces these to be stacked vertically. And we can see that in the app, which we will get started running right now. And again, to start your app, if you just do npm run dev and run that in the terminal, then it'll do everything necessary to get the app started. So now I will go over to the app, refresh. All right, and here we have the app set up. And you can see those 2 layout.sections. That's what these are. And they're just stacked vertically here on this page. Going back over to the code, just to check out a little bit more, they have the title bar component here, which is pretty straightforward. Just the title section here of the app. In the first layout section, we see this card component being used with the sectioned prop. And all that does is just add some padding around the card content. And I can show you exactly what that means. If we open up, go over back to the app and open up the browser inspector, and let's take a closer look just to see how the app structure and the code translates to the actual UI. So let's right click and inspect on this first card here, and let's find the div with a class of Polaris-card right here. These class names are pretty straightforward, and you can easily infer which component you're looking at by just the rendered class name here in the source code. So we have Polaris card here, which of course is the top card we're looking at. You can see above that card element, there is the layout section, then the layout element, which corresponds to our code structure over here. So going down further in the source code here, we have the card section, which is just adding that padding around the content. And then we get to the actual card content. In the code, we see a stack element being used here, which is a component used to create horizontal and vertical layouts, similar to how Flexbox works in CSS to create rows and columns. The default layout of a stack component is horizontal. So if you look here at the stack.item components, you can see that there is 1 and 2 of these in this stack. So you can infer from the code that we're going to be looking at a row with basically just 2 elements in it. So if we go back over to the browser, and then we hover over this Polaris stack class, you can see exactly that the content is split up between 2 sides in a row. We have the first item, which if I open this up, we can hover over it exactly. So we have the first item here, the Polaris stack.item, which has that text and all the header and everything on the left-hand side of the card. And then the next Polaris stack.item has the image. So it's basically just a row contained by this Polaris stack. If we go over and look at the code for this first stack item, then we will see a text container component, then a heading component, and some p tags. And then within those p tags, there's a few link components as well. And just a couple side notes here. I won't be going over every single component we come across or add in today, just because a lot of them are straightforward and can be easily found in the docs. Things like the card that we went over, the stack, text container and heading. These are all very easily found in the documentation, and you can look through and see all the examples and props and everything there. So I'd recommend just having the Polaris component docs up as you work through this code and then do your own research and make your own changes to this code, and you'll be able to understand a lot of it quickly, especially if you've worked with React or another component-based library or framework. And I'll also be moving somewhat quickly here since there's a lot to go through, but as long as you follow along and are reviewing the code, you should be able to understand exactly what's going on here. And one last thing to point out here is that some of these components will be deprecated very soon in the future. Things like the heading and a couple other components that I've come across are being deprecated in the newer versions. So most of them are pretty small changes, like you'll just be using a text component instead of a heading. So just watch out for that and be aware of it. So make sure you're looking in the docs and comparing that to what you're doing here. All right, so now that we've seen the structure for this first card, which has a stack with 2 items in it, we'll go down to the second layout.section to look at that. And we see this custom ProductsCard component. So let's go to that file, which is found under the components directory. And it's just ProductsCards.jsx. And if you need to, if you're trying to find where a component is imported from, you can, of course, go to the top of the file and look at the imports. So here's ProductsCard, and you can see it's just coming from that components directory. So that's how we know to go there. This is the component that we edited a tiny bit in the last video to get it to fetch some product data from our backend and log it out to the console here. We had added this fetch products function, but we actually won't be using it from this point on. So we can go ahead and remove that. Then we'll update this primary footer action that we had previously set up to use that function that we just removed, this fetch products. So we'll remove that and we'll change it back to the handle populate function that was in there before. And then we'll change the text back to what it said before, which was populate 5 products. And you know what? Let's actually go back to our index.jsx real quick under the just this main pages directory. And we're going to actually remove this entire top card because we're not going to be using it from now on. So we're just going to delete it. So everywhere from this, basically this entire first layout.section. So we'll just remove that. And then all we have is this one layout.section with the ProductsCard component in there. So we can save that and come back to make sure that it's gone, and it is in fact gone. So now let's go back into this ProductsCard.jsx component and make a few more edits. So the first thing I want to go over real quick is navigation from your app throughout the admin. It's a pretty common use case where you'll want to link to a product or customer page from within your app, and Shopify gives us a very easy way to do this through App Bridge. And remember, App Bridge is a tool made by Shopify that allows us to integrate with the rest of the admin, even though our app is just an iframe, which generally can't interact with the host page. So the action we'll be using from App Bridge is called useNavigate, and it's a hook that will import directly from this App Bridge React library, which is actually the same place that our toast component is being imported from. So let's go ahead and import useNavigate, and it'll autocomplete and recognize that that's what we want to use. If you want to see a full list of actions and components you can use from App Bridge, you can go to the docs on shopify.dev and take a look through there. There are some components like the toast and modal that are in the Polaris library, as well as the AppBridge component library. And the difference there is, for example, with the modal, when you open a modal from the Polaris library, it only darkens the app in the background. But with the AppBridge modal, it darkens the entire admin because, again, AppBridge allows us to interact with the admin in ways that you can't normally do from an iframe, which is what our app is. So now that we're importing this useNavigate hook, we can call it a little bit further down here. And this hook just returns a function which we will call navigate. And then we can use this navigate function to link to other parts of the admin. So let's add a secondary footer action to this card here, which is just a prop on the card called secondary footer actions, which if you check the docs, you'll see that this is just an array of action objects. Similar to what we have right here, this is an action object in the primary footer action. Secondary footer actions is just an array of multiple actions that you want to add in. So here we'll just add a single action that has the content set to view all products, and then in the on action is where we want to put what we want to happen when the button is clicked. So if we do on action, and like the content implies, we're going to link to the products page from this button. So we'll just use our navigate function here like so. It takes a config object, and in our case, we'll want to set the name prop of this object to product with a capital P. And then you can see the same configuration under the useNavigate docs, and there it shows all of the different possible options. But in this case, in order to go to just the products page, all we need to do is call navigate, and in this first argument, we just put in an object with the name prop and set it to product. We also want this products page to open in a new tab instead of redirecting away from our app. So there is an options object that we can pass in as a second argument. And for that one, we'll want to just say target and set it to new. Now, if we save our app and click on the secondary footer action that has appeared here on the card, then it opens up the products page in the admin in a new tab, just like that. So we want this card to be really simple for our app. So let's remove just everything inside of this text container. And let's see. Then we're just going to add a new p tag with a small description. Use this nifty tool to create and update products, just like that. And scrolling up a bit, just to kind of prune out this this file for things that we don't need, we can actually remove this entire use app query. So this whole block of code. That call, all it was doing was just getting the count of products for our store, and we don't need that for our app. Coming up, we've also got some unused imports here that we can take out just to kind of clean up the file a bit. And then I've got an automatic formatter that I just ran to automatically format the code. Okay, so we've updated our ProductsCard component and it's looking clean. It's hooked up to populate 5 products when we click here. We actually need to change the loading state. The default loading state is set to true. We'll just want to set that to false for now. There. So when we click on this button, it'll populate the 5 products. When we click on the View All Products button, it'll take us to a new tab on the products page. And actually on this Populate 5 Products button, if you remember in the last video, we actually modified this endpoint, product/create. So it continues to create products, but it now does it with a default description and adds a random product image in there as well as the title and price. So now what we're going to do is create a new component under this components directory called ProductCard, singular, .jsx. And here we are going to just use this to display an individual product card just down here below the main card. And we'll add that file we are going to set up a functional component called ProductCard. And we'll start by building out the card UI, and then we'll add the data and other state and everything afterwards. We know this will be a card, of course, so we're going to import the card component from Shopify Polaris. And then let's go ahead and return the card component. And let's add the section prop as well to add that padding around the content. And we'll go ahead and add the primary and secondary footer actions right now as well. We want the primary action to be basically an update button for the product. So we'll add in this primary footer action prop, and we'll set the content prop to update product, this is just the text that shows up on the button. And for the on action prop, for now we'll just set it to a console log just to make sure that it's actually working. Once again, if you're ever confused about how to actually set up these props, you can check out the Polaris documentation. So as an example, let's go ahead and head over to the card component here in the documentation. Then we can scroll down to the props here. We see the sectioned prop that we added. If you scroll down a bit, you can see the primary footer action that we just barely added as well. And it actually shows the type next to all of these props. So like the sectioned is just a simple Boolean. This primary footer action is a complex action. If you click on it, it'll expand that and show you exactly what the complex action type is. So here we see like the content, the on action, but you've got a bunch of other ones you can add, like the ID, a disabled prop, and a few other action handlers. The next thing we'll add is a secondary footer action. So just below that primary footer action here in the docs, you can see that the secondary footer actions is just an array of these complex action types, since there can be multiple secondary actions. So we'll go ahead and add this prop into our code as well. Save that. We'll add secondary footer actions. We'll create it as an array, and we'll have just one action within that array with the content prop set to view in admin. And the on action, we'll do just a simple console log here as well. Again, just to make sure everything's working as we expect. Okay, so let's add some placeholder text in this card here. We'll save that. We'll make it available to the rest of the app by just exporting it here, and then we'll go ahead and export it from the index.js file under components, just so it's a bit cleaner to import other places. Then we'll go back to the index.jsx file under pages, and let's add another layout.section component underneath the first one, and we will render the product card component there. And I've got in my VS Code got an autocomplete, so I can just tab out and it'll auto import the component. So if you don't see me doing that explicitly, it's doing it in the background. So just be aware of that and import it yourself manually if you need to. So let's save all of our changes and go over to the app in our store and check out our new card. And there it is. We'll fill out the rest of the card now, which will have things like the product image, some fields to update the title and description, and then we'll eventually add an accordion displaying the variants just below that. We know that our card will be split into basically two sections. The left side will be the image, and the right side will be the title and description fields. So to create a layout like that, which is basically a row, we'll use a stack component from Polaris. In the Polaris docs, if we go and check out the stack, which I know we kind of went over a little bit already earlier, but if we go check it out, it's used to lay out a horizontal row or to achieve no fuss vertical centering. It also has a prop that allows you to create vertical stacks, and overall just makes it super easy to keep items centered and aligned. So in our ProductCard.jsx file, we'll go ahead and add the stack component within this card. Then we'll use stack.item for the first item. And technically you don't need to add this stack.item component, but I'm going to add it just for simplicity, as well as another reason that we'll get to in a few minutes. But think of it as just a wrapper for now. In this first item, we'll add an image tag, and we'll set the width to just 250 for now. And then the source, eventually it'll pull from the actual product and use the product image. But for now, we're going to use this home trophy.png file under the assets folder, which is just the default image that comes with the template. So we'll go ahead and put in the path to that image. And when we save that and go back over to the app, we see that it does show the image on the card. Now let's go ahead and add the form content that's going to live on the right side of this card. So we'll put just another stack.item component here in the stack. And to build this form, we're going to use the form layout Polaris component, since what we have here is a form. This isn't absolutely necessary, but it makes building forms much easier because it'll arrange the layout for you and set up the correct spacing and everything. And it has some options for customizing the layout as well. So inside of this form layout component, we're just going to add two text field components, just like that. One for the product title and the other for the product description. So we'll go ahead and add a label here called product title, and then on this one, product description. For the product description text field, we're going to go ahead and add the multi-line attribute as well, and just set it to a value of 4. And all that's going to do is just make the field a bit bigger, since it's going to be used for a product description. So if we save that and come back over to the card, you can see the layout looks a bit strange. You know, the text fields are cut off a little bit short from here, and there's quite a bit of space left around, and just overall the layout's a bit strange. So there's a couple things that we'll change in the code to fix that real quick. The very first one is if we go back into index.jsx under pages, the page component has this narrow width prop added. Let's go ahead and remove that and save that. And now the cards are quite a bit bigger. And in my opinion, it looks better. You can see that the forms, or the fields here in the form, are still quite a bit short. They don't extend out to the rest of the card at all. So now we'll go back into our ProductCard.jsx file. We'll do one thing here on the parent stack component. We're going to add just the spacing prop, and we'll set that to extra loose. So I'll go ahead and save that and take a look at the difference that made. Not a huge difference. It just adds a little bit of padding and more spacing between the elements. Looks a little bit better. Not a huge difference, but it overall will help with the feel of the layout for this particular card that we're going for. The last thing that we're going to do here is add the fill attribute or prop on this last or the second stack.item that has the form layout inside of it. And all that does is it tells this stack item that it can go ahead and fill up all of the remaining space of the parent. So now it fills up the rest of the space available in the card. And I mentioned before that you don't really need the stack.item here, but in our case, if you want to add something like this, like the fill property, then you do need to add the stack.item, and it's just easier to add it to all of the items within the stack. It just makes it more straightforward and easier to read. So we're going to end this video here and continue building the UI in the next one, since there's still a bit left to cover and this video is getting a little long already. In the next one, we'll be adding the UI for editing variants, adding state for all of these fields, and prepping everything for hooking up the back end and the front end so we can start working with real data. If you liked this video and have been following along with the series, or if you're new here, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't. I'll be finishing up the series over the next few weeks, and I'm excited to start making other videos based on your recommendations. So please leave any questions or topics you'd like to see in the comments below. You can also DM me on Twitter or shoot me an email to get a hold of me, and all that info is in the description. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.